The wind cut different on the northern Great Plains. Jacob F. learned that his first winter in Dakota Territory in 1883, when his cast iron stove burned through 3 cords of wood in a single blizzard and still left his cabin barely 10 degrees warmer than the howling cold outside. He had built his heating system exactly the way every homesteader on the frontier was told to build it: standard wood-burning stove against the exterior wall, frequent refires every few hours, proven and simple. Across the territory, settlers were fighting the same losing battle with stoves that devoured cord after cord of precious fuel, yet failed when the real cold hit. Over the next 2 years, Jacob quietly applied an underground stone method that neighbors called insane, combining techniques from his grandfather's Black Forest tradition with knowledge borrowed from Lakota winter camps. His system stayed 58 degrees warmer for 20 hours on half the wood. In this video, I'll break down the exact principles and measurements behind his results. What did Jacob understand about heat storage that every other homesteader on the plains had missed? The blizzard that hit in late November of 1883 lasted 4 days. Jacob Fletcher watched his neighbor Thompson struggle through that storm, lighting his cast iron stove 8 separate times as the wind hammered their claim near the Missouri River bend. Thompson's firebox measured roughly 2 feet by 2 feet, standard catalog size, and he fed it split cottonwood and oak scraps every 3 hours around the clock. By the second morning, Thompson had burned through nearly his entire winter reserve. His wife Sarah wrapped the children in every quilt they owned, but ice still formed on the water bucket just 4 feet from the stove. When the storm finally broke, Thompson's interior temperature had never risen more than 10 degrees above the outside air, and his family had spent 2 nights sleeping in the root cellar, where the earth provided more warmth than their heated cabin. Jacob had endured the same conditions in his own cabin, built according to the same frontier wisdom that dominated the Dakota Territory settlements. His stove sat flush against the north exterior wall, exactly where the supply catalogs recommended for efficient chimney installation. The sod and log construction followed standard homestead patterns: 12-inch thick walls, mud chinking between the logs, minimal consideration for heat retention beyond basic wind blocking. Like every settler along the Missouri, Jacob had accepted the conventional approach because it appeared practical, modern, and required no specialized masonry skills. The iron stoves could be ordered through Montgomery Ward, installed without complex stonework, and maintained by any homesteader with basic tools. But Jacob carried knowledge that most prairie settlers lacked. His grandfather had operated a bakery in the Black Forest region of Germany, where winter temperatures routinely dropped below 0 Fahrenheit for months. The old man had built his ovens with stone walls nearly 3 feet thick, designed to absorb heat from intense fires and radiate warmth long after the flames died. Jacob remembered watching his grandfather's apprentices construct elaborate internal chambers that channeled hot gases through winding paths within the masonry before allowing them to escape. These ovens could heat the entire bakery through a 14-hour night using a single 2-hour firing. His military service had also exposed Jacob to heating methods beyond standard frontier practice. During cavalry operations in Montana Territory, he had observed how Lakota camps managed winter warmth using heated stone platforms beneath their lodges. A Lakota friend named Tatanka Luda had explained how certain stones could store fire heat for an entire night, warming sleeping areas without maintaining active flames. The stones were selected for their density and ability to absorb thermal energy, then arranged to create thermal mass that released heat gradually through direct contact and radiation. When Jacob began discussing his underground stone oven concept with neighbors and local suppliers, the response was immediate skepticism. Thompson called the plan impractical for frontier conditions, arguing that heavy masonry required skills and materials that Dakota homesteaders could not afford. The supply agent in the nearest settlement, a man named Morrison, who sold iron stoves throughout the territory, dismissed Jacob's idea as European luxury unsuited to American frontier efficiency. Morrison insisted that cast iron stoves represented modern heating technology, designed specifically for rapid installation and reliable performance in challenging conditions. The criticism extended beyond practicality into social territory. Other homesteaders viewed Jacob's masonry plan as pretentious, an unnecessary deviation from proven methods that had served frontier families across the Western territories. Mrs. Peterson, whose family had successfully wintered in a similar cabin the previous year, argued that frequent refiring was simply part of frontier life, no different from daily milking or water hauling. She questioned why Jacob would invest weeks of labor in experimental construction when reliable stoves were readily available through established supply channels. Jacob understood their skepticism contained valid concerns. He lacked complete knowledge about underground oven construction and had never built such a system independently. His grandfather's techniques had been developed for commercial bakery operations, not residential heating in sod house conditions. The Lakota thermal stone methods he had observed were designed for portable lodges, not permanent homestead structures. Jacob realized he would need to adapt and combine these different knowledge sources into something entirely new. The technical challenges seemed daunting when Jacob analyzed them systematically. He understood the basic principle that thick stone mass could absorb and store heat energy, then release it slowly over extended periods. He also grasped that directing hot combustion gases through longer paths within the masonry would transfer more energy into the stone before allowing the gases to escape. However, Jacob did not yet know the optimal dimensions for his underground fire chamber, the proper thickness for thermal mass walls, or the correct length and configuration for internal flue channels. The integration of heat release into his living space presented another complex problem. Jacob needed to design a system that would radiate stored heat upward into the cabin while preventing heat loss downward into the surrounding earth. This required understanding soil thermal properties, moisture management, and the relationship between mass placement and heat distribution patterns. His grandfather's bakery ovens had operated in insulated buildings with stone foundations, very different conditions from prairie sod house construction. Despite these knowledge gaps, Jacob recognized that conventional heating methods had failed dramatically during the recent blizzard. Thompson's experience proved that frequent refiring and standard stove placement could not maintain comfortable interior temperatures during severe weather events. With winter approaching again and limited fuel supplies available for purchase, Jacob concluded that experimenting with alternative heating methods represented a necessary risk rather than an optional improvement. By early December, Jacob committed to constructing his underground stone oven before the next winter season arrived. He would spend the following months gathering materials, consulting with anyone who possessed relevant knowledge, and developing construction techniques through trial and observation. The project would test whether traditional thermal mass principles could be successfully adapted to frontier homestead conditions, potentially revolutionizing how prairie settlers approached winter heating challenges. Jacob began excavation work in early March of 1884, when the ground thawed enough to permit digging. His first attempt followed conventional homestead foundation practice, placing his stone mass directly on a shallow log platform elevated 18 inches above grade level. This approach matched standard stove installation methods throughout Dakota Territory, where settlers typically built wooden floors to keep metal stoves off damp earth while providing access for ash removal and maintenance. The initial test revealed a critical flaw that conventional wisdom had overlooked. When Jacob lit his first experimental fire in late March, the stone mass absorbed heat effectively during the 2-hour burn, warming his cabin to a comfortable 60 degrees Fahrenheit. However, within 6 hours after the flames died, interior temperature plummeted to 30 degrees despite the heavy masonry remaining warm to the touch. The heat was disappearing faster than his calculations predicted, draining away through pathways he had not anticipated. Tatanka Luda visited Jacob's claim during this early testing period and immediately identified the primary heat loss mechanism. The Lakota elder knelt beside the stone platform and placed his hand on the ground beneath the structure, explaining that prairie soil conducted thermal energy directly away from heated objects when they made contact with unfrozen earth. In Lakota winter camps, heated stones were always separated from ground contact using layers of hide, bark, or other insulating materials to prevent this conductive loss. Without proper isolation, even massive stones would transfer their stored energy into the surrounding soil rather than radiating it into living spaces. Jacob realized that his German grandfather's bakery ovens had operated under completely different soil conditions. European commercial ovens were typically built on stone foundations that extended below the frost line, surrounded by basements or cellars that provided natural insulation from ground temperature. Dakota Territory topsoil froze to depths of 3 to 4 feet during winter months, creating an enormous thermal sink that could absorb unlimited amounts of heat energy from any object placed in direct or indirect contact. The second problem emerged when Jacob examined air movement patterns around his elevated platform. Cold exterior air was flowing freely underneath the wooden structure, creating convective cooling that stripped heat from the bottom surfaces of his stone mass. This draft infiltration occurred because frontier log construction typically left gaps between floor supports to prevent moisture accumulation, a necessary practice for preventing rot in wooden structures. However, these same gaps allowed frigid air to circulate continuously beneath the thermal mass, carrying away valuable heat through forced convection. A German stonemason named Heinrich Müller had recently established residence in a settlement 15 miles east of Jacob's claim. Müller possessed traditional European knowledge of foundation construction for heavy masonry structures, including techniques developed specifically for preventing ground contact heat loss. When Jacob consulted him about the excavation requirements, Müller explained that substantial stone masses required foundations that extended below local frost penetration depths to establish thermal stability. Müller's approach involved digging to 4 feet below grade level, well beneath Dakota Territory frost line depths. The excavation measured 6 feet by 6 feet to provide adequate bearing area for approximately 2 tons of stone mass. Rather than placing stones directly on soil, Müller recommended creating a graduated foundation bed using 12 inches of compacted gravel, topped with 6 inches of coarse sand. This layered base would distribute weight evenly while creating a capillary break that prevented moisture from wicking upward into the stone mass. The most critical innovation involved wrapping the lower portion of the stone assembly with additional field stone barriers. Müller demonstrated how to construct dry stacked stone walls around the perimeter of the main mass, creating an insulating airspace between the heated stones and the surrounding earth. This technique, derived from German cellar construction methods, prevented direct thermal conduction while allowing the mass to shed excess moisture through controlled drainage paths. Tatanka Luda contributed additional refinements based on indigenous earth lodge construction principles. He showed Jacob how to line the excavation walls with clay mixed with chopped grass, creating a moisture barrier that prevented groundwater infiltration while maintaining structural integrity. The clay lining also provided additional thermal resistance, further reducing heat transfer into the surrounding soil. Most importantly, Tatanka Luda explained the necessity of creating controlled ventilation beneath the mass to prevent cold air stagnation, while eliminating the draft problems that had plagued Jacob's elevated platform design. Jacob implemented these combined techniques during April and May, excavating his foundation pit to precisely 4 feet below grade level. He hauled gravel from a creek bed 2 miles away, using his ox cart to transport the 12 cubic feet of material required for the foundation bed. The sand layer came from deposits along the Missouri River, requiring 3 separate hauling trips to accumulate sufficient quantity. Each layer was compacted using a wooden tamper Jacob constructed from oak planks and a heavy stone head. The field stone perimeter walls required careful selection and placement of local prairie stone. Jacob spent 2 weeks gathering flat limestone pieces from a quarry site 8 miles northwest of his claim, choosing stones that could be dry stacked without mortar while maintaining structural stability. The air gap between the main mass and the perimeter walls measured 6 inches, providing sufficient insulation space without excessive material requirements. Installation of the clay moisture barrier proved more labor-intensive than Jacob anticipated. He located suitable clay deposits near a seasonal pond, but the material required extensive processing to achieve proper consistency. Jacob mixed the clay with chopped prairie grass using techniques Tatanka Luda demonstrated, creating a plastic material that could be smoothed against excavation walls without cracking as it dried. The grass fibers provided tensile strength, while the clay created an effective moisture seal. When Jacob completed the foundation work in late May, He conducted immediate testing using small fires to verify thermal performance. The improved system demonstrated dramatically different heat retention, characteristics compared to his original elevated platform design. A 2-hour fire heated the stone mass to approximately the same peak temperature as before, but the rate of heat loss decreased substantially. Instead of dropping 30 degrees in 6 hours, the stone mass lost only 20 degrees over the same period, representing a 33% improvement in thermal retention. The elimination of cold air infiltration beneath the mass proved equally important for overall system performance. Jacob measured air temperature at floor level before and after the foundation improvements, discovering that controlled ventilation prevented the temperature stratification that had plagued his original design. The heated stone now warmed air at floor level rather than allowing cold drafts to flow continuously beneath the thermal mass. Jacob's initial firebox design followed frontier stove conventions, featuring a simple rectangular combustion chamber with a straight chimney exit. During his first serious test in June of 1884, he discovered that this arrangement wasted enormous quantities of thermal energy through hot exhaust gases. Using a metal probe thermometer borrowed from the territorial surveyor, Jacob measured flue gas temperatures of 450 degrees Fahrenheit at the chimney outlet, even 30 minutes after his fire had burned down to coals. This superheated exhaust represented energy that should have been captured within his stone mass rather than lost to the atmosphere. The mathematical implications troubled Jacob when he calculated the thermal waste. Hot gases at 400 degrees contained substantially more energy than the room temperature air they displaced, meaning his system was literally burning valuable fuel to heat the Dakota sky rather than his living space. Standard cast iron stoves suffered the same inefficiency, but their operators compensated by maintaining continuous fires. Jacob's thermal mass concept required extracting maximum energy from each firing cycle, making exhaust heat recovery essential for practical operation. A correspondence network among immigrant communities provided Jacob's breakthrough solution. Through a Lutheran minister who maintained connections with Russian settlements in Minnesota, Jacob learned about traditional Russian heating systems called pech that incorporated elaborate internal flue arrangements. These systems forced hot combustion gases to travel circuitous paths through masonry masses before allowing them to escape, dramatically reducing exhaust temperatures while increasing heat transfer into the surrounding stonework. The Russian technique involved constructing internal channels within the stone mass that created a labyrinthine path for hot gases. Instead of allowing exhaust to flow directly upward from the firebox, the flue system directed gases horizontally through the mass, then vertically upward, then horizontally again through multiple chambers, before finally reaching the exterior chimney. This serpentine pathway increased the contact time between hot gases and stone surfaces, enabling more complete heat extraction. A Finnish immigrant named Väinö Häkkinen had established a tile stove installation business in a German settlement 30 miles south of Jacob's claim. Häkkinen possessed knowledge of Scandinavian heating systems that used horizontal baffle arrangements within masonry masses to control gas flow patterns. When Jacob visited his workshop in July, Häkkinen demonstrated how carefully placed stone barriers could force exhaust gases to flow through predetermined paths, ensuring even heat distribution throughout the thermal mass, while preventing short-circuit pathways that allowed hot gases to escape without transferring their energy. Häkkinen's baffles system required precise stone cutting and placement to create controlled flow channels. Each horizontal barrier extended partially across the flue pathway, forcing gases to flow around the obstruction before continuing toward the next level. The barriers were positioned to create turbulence that enhanced heat transfer, while maintaining sufficient cross-sectional area to prevent excessive back pressure that could cause smoke to enter the living space. Jacob began constructing his internal flue system in August, incorporating both Russian maze principles and Finnish baffle techniques. His firebox measured 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 18 inches deep, providing adequate combustion space for sustained oak and cottonwood fires. From the firebox, Jacob created a horizontal channel that extended 4 feet through the stone mass before turning vertically upward for 2 feet, then turning horizontal again for another 4 feet in the opposite direction. This pattern repeated 3 times, creating a total internal flue length of approximately 20 feet within his thermal mass. The construction process required careful attention to channel dimensions and stone joint sealing. Jacob cut local limestone to create smooth flue surfaces that would minimize friction losses while preventing hot gas leakage into surrounding stone. Each channel measured 8 inches wide and 6 inches high, providing sufficient area for gas flow while maximizing surface contact with the thermal mass. He used clay mortar mixed with sand to seal all joints, ensuring that combustion gases could only travel through intended pathways. Testing the completed system in early September revealed dramatic improvements in heat extraction efficiency. Jacob measured exhaust gas temperatures at the final chimney outlet, discovering they had dropped to 220 degrees Fahrenheit, less than half the temperature of his original straight flue design. This reduction represented substantial energy transfer into his stone mass, significantly increasing the thermal storage capacity of each firing cycle. The performance improvement became apparent during Jacob's first serious cold weather test in October, when nighttime temperatures dropped to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. He built a standard 2-hour fire using seasoned oak, allowing the combustion gases to travel through his complete internal maze before exiting. The stone mass absorbed significantly more thermal energy than his previous design, reaching peak temperatures that remained warm to the touch for more than 18 hours after the fire ended. However, Jacob encountered an unexpected problem during this testing period that nearly derailed his entire project. On a particularly still morning with heavy atmospheric pressure, combustion gases began backing up into his living space instead of flowing properly through the internal channels. The problem occurred because cold stone mass created excessive resistance to gas flow, while insufficient draft pressure could not overcome the friction losses in his extended flue system. Recognizing that his maze concept required active flow control, Jacob consulted with Häkkinen about traditional Scandinavian solutions to draft management problems. Häkkinen explained the necessity of incorporating manual dampers that could regulate gas flow during different operating conditions. He also emphasized the importance of clean-out access ports that allowed removal of soot accumulation that could gradually restrict flow channels. Jacob installed a pivoting iron damper plate at the junction between his firebox and the internal flue maze, allowing him to control the initial gas flow rate during fire startup. He also created removable stone covers at each horizontal channel turn, providing access for periodic cleaning of combustion residue. These refinements required additional metalwork and precise stone fitting, but they proved essential for reliable system operation under varying weather conditions. The completed system underwent comprehensive testing during November's increasingly cold weather. Jacob discovered that proper damper management during firelighting prevented smoke backup, while the extended flue pathway captured heat energy that would otherwise escape through conventional chimney arrangements. His room temperature measurements showed that the internal maze concept could maintain comfortable interior conditions for significantly longer periods using substantially less fuel than either his original design or neighboring conventional stoves. Jacob's initial stone wall construction used 6-inch thick limestone blocks, following conventional masonry practices he observed in regional building projects. This thickness seemed adequate when he compared it to standard frontier chimney construction, but November testing revealed a fundamental flaw in his thermal storage calculations. The relatively thin walls absorbed heat rapidly during firing cycles, then released that energy equally quickly once combustion ended. By midnight following an evening fire, his stone mass had cooled to barely 20 degrees above exterior temperature, leaving his cabin uncomfortably cold through the remaining night hours. The positioning of his thermal mass created additional heat loss problems that Jacob had not anticipated. Following conventional stove placement logic, he had built his stone assembly flush against the cabin's north exterior wall, reasoning that this location would maximize interior space while providing easy chimney access. However, this arrangement created a direct thermal bridge between his heated stones and the frigid exterior environment. Winter winds at 20 below zero Fahrenheit drew heat directly through the cabin wall, cooling the exterior face of his stone mass and reducing overall thermal retention. Tatanka Luda visited Jacob's claim during a December cold snap and immediately recognized the heat transfer problem. The Lakota elder explained how traditional earth lodge construction placed heated stone platforms away from exterior walls. typically in central locations where thermal radiation could warm all interior surfaces equally. He described how Pueblo peoples in southwestern territories built their heating masses with walls measuring 2 feet thick or more, creating substantial thermal storage that could radiate warmth for entire nights following brief but intense firings. These indigenous techniques reflected principles that Jacob's European contacts also understood through different cultural traditions. A Swiss immigrant named Klaus Zimmermann had established a carpentry shop in the territorial capital, specializing in furniture and interior fittings for prosperous merchants. When Jacob consulted him about thermal mass placement, Zimmermann described traditional alpine heating systems that incorporated massive stone assemblies surrounded by wooden benches where families could sit or sleep in direct contact with radiant stone surfaces. Zimmermann's approach emphasized human-scale heat transfer rather than simply warming air volumes. His grandfather's workshop in the canton of Bern featured a central masonry heater with broad stone ledges that provided seating and work surfaces during cold months. Family members could place their feet directly against warm stone, receiving radiant heat through physical contact rather than relying solely on heated air circulation. This direct contact method proved far more efficient than attempting to warm entire room volumes using convective air movement. The bench concept required substantial modifications to Jacob's existing stone assembly. During January of 1885, he began dismantling portions of his thermal mass to relocate the entire system toward the center of his living space. This repositioning involved moving approximately 2 tons of carefully fitted stonework, requiring weeks of systematic deconstruction and reconstruction while maintaining his functional flue pathways. Jacob increased his stone wall thickness from 6 inches to 12 inches during this reconstruction process, effectively doubling the thermal storage capacity of his system. The additional mass required quarrying and hauling another ton of limestone, but the investment promised substantially longer heat retention periods. Each stone required individual fitting and placement to maintain structural integrity while preserving the internal flue channels that had proven essential for heat extraction efficiency. The relocated mass occupied a more central position within Jacob's cabin, approximately 4 feet from any exterior wall. This placement eliminated the direct thermal bridging that had plagued his original design, while allowing radiant heat to reach all interior surfaces more effectively. Jacob constructed broad stone ledges extending 18 inches from the main mass on 3 sides, creating bench surfaces at comfortable seating height where family members could position themselves for direct thermal contact. Installing natural convection enhancement required adding carefully positioned air grates at the base of his stone assembly. Jacob created rectangular openings measuring 6 inches wide and 3 inches high at floor level, allowing cool air to flow beneath and around the heated stones before rising as warmed air into the upper portions of his living space. This circulation pattern prevented temperature stratification while ensuring that heat stored within the stone mass reached all areas of the room rather than remaining trapped around the thermal mass itself. The convection system required understanding air movement patterns that most frontier builders ignored. Jacob observed how cold air naturally flowed along the floor toward his heated stones, then rose as it absorbed thermal energy from the warm surfaces. By providing controlled pathways for this air movement, he could enhance natural circulation without requiring mechanical fans or complex ducting systems. The floor-level grates also prevented stagnant air pockets that could reduce overall heating efficiency. Testing the redesigned system during February's severe cold revealed dramatic performance improvements. When exterior temperatures dropped to -20 degrees Fahrenheit, Jacob's centrally positioned thermal mass with 12-inch thick walls maintained his cabin at 55 degrees following a standard 2-hour evening fire. More importantly, the interior temperature held at 45 degrees for 20 consecutive hours, providing comfortable conditions through the following night and most of the next day. The bench surfaces proved particularly effective for personal heating during the coldest periods. Jacob could position himself directly against the warm stone, receiving radiant heat transfer that kept him comfortable even when air temperatures dropped toward 40 degrees. His wife could warm her feet against the stone ledges while working at household tasks, maintaining circulation and comfort that would have been impossible using Conventional stove arrangements. Fuel consumption measurements demonstrated the economic advantages of Jacob's improved thermal storage system. During the February test period, he used approximately half a cord of seasoned oak to maintain comfortable interior conditions for 20 hours. Thomson's conventional iron stove required nearly 2 full cords during the same period while providing inferior comfort levels. Jacob's system achieved this efficiency by storing thermal energy within substantial stone mass, then releasing it gradually through controlled radiation rather than attempting to maintain continuous combustion. The convection grates proved essential for distributing stored heat throughout the living space. Jacob measured air temperatures at various heights and locations, discovering that his enhanced circulation system eliminated the cold zones that typically developed in corners and along exterior walls. Warm air rising from the stone mass created gentle circulation patterns that maintained relatively uniform temperatures throughout the cabin interior. By March, Jacob's complete system demonstrated consistent performance across varying weather conditions. The combination of adequate thermal mass thickness, central positioning, bench construction, and controlled convection had created a heating system that operated fundamentally differently from conventional frontier stoves, providing sustained warmth using substantially less fuel while maintaining superior comfort levels. The blizzard that struck Dakota Territory in March of 1885 exceeded anything settlers had experienced since the devastating winter of 1881. Weather observers at the territorial capital recorded sustained winds of 60 miles per hour, with gusts reaching 75, while temperatures plummeted to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit and remained there for 4 consecutive days. Snow accumulation reached 8 feet in some areas, blocking roads and isolating homesteads throughout the Missouri River Valley region. Thomson's household faced immediate crisis when the storm intensity overwhelmed his conventional heating capacity. His cast iron stove, rated by the manufacturer for heating spaces up to 400 square feet, required constant attention to maintain even minimal interior warmth. Thomson burned seasoned cottonwood and oak continuously, refiring every 90 minutes around the clock to prevent his cabin temperature from dropping below freezing. By the second day, his wife Sarah was melting snow for drinking water because their interior barrel had frozen solid despite sitting within 6 feet of the active stove. The Peterson family, whose cabin sat on higher ground 2 miles east of Jacob's claim, experienced similar heating failures despite having installed a larger stove the previous autumn. Their upgraded model featured a firebox measuring 30 inches by 24 inches, substantially larger than standard Frontier units, yet it proved inadequate against the sustained extreme conditions. Mrs. Peterson later reported burning 4 cords of split hardwood during the 96-hour storm while achieving interior temperatures that never exceeded 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Her family spent the final night sleeping in their root cellar, where earth temperature provided more consistent warmth than their heated living space. Jacob's approach to the crisis demonstrated principles that conventional stove operation could not match. On the storm's first evening, he built his standard 2-hour fire using seasoned oak, allowing his 3-ton thermal mass to absorb energy through the complete internal flue system. Unlike his neighbors who maintained continuous combustion, Jacob deliberately allowed his fire to burn down to ash, then sealed his firebox and damper system to prevent heat loss through unnecessary air circulation. The thermal inertia principle became critical during this extended cold period. Jacob's massive stone assembly, heated to peak capacity during the initial firing, began releasing stored energy at a controlled rate determined by the physical properties of limestone and the surface area of his radiating walls. This energy release occurred independently of exterior weather conditions, providing steady heat output regardless of wind speed or temperature fluctuations that affected conventional stove performance. Temperature measurements throughout the storm revealed the fundamental difference between thermal storage and continuous combustion approaches. Jacob's cabin interior peaked at 70 degrees Fahrenheit following his initial fire, then declined gradually to 60 degrees by the end of the first 12-hour period. During the second day, interior temperature stabilized at 58 degrees and remained at that level for the duration of the storm. Meanwhile, Thomson's cabin experienced dramatic temperature swings, rising to 60 degrees immediately after each refiring, then dropping to 30 degrees before the next fuel loading. The fuel consumption comparison provided quantitative evidence of each system's efficiency. Jacob used 3/4 of a cord of seasoned oak during the entire 4-day period, representing his single initial firing plus small maintenance fires on the third and fourth days when he chose to boost interior temperature for comfort rather than necessity. Thompson consumed 4 1/4 cords of mixed hardwood while achieving inferior heating performance, representing a fuel efficiency difference of more than 5-to-1 in Jacob's favor. Structural stress analysis revealed another advantage of thermal mass systems during extreme weather events. Conventional stoves operating at maximum capacity created thermal shock conditions that damaged both the heating units and surrounding construction elements. Thompson's stove developed hairline cracks in the firebox walls from repeated rapid heating cycles, while his chimney suffered mortar joint failures from expansion and contraction stress. The Peterson family's oversized stove actually warped its cast iron door frame, creating air leaks that reduced heating efficiency and created safety concerns. Jacob's stone assembly operated within its designed thermal parameters throughout the storm, experiencing gradual temperature changes that created minimal structural stress. The limestone blocks expanded and contracted slowly as the mass heated and cooled, while the internal flue channels maintained their dimensions without cracking or warping. This thermal stability meant that Jacob's system actually improved its performance during extended operation, as the stone reached thermal equilibrium and began operating at peak efficiency. Water supply management became a critical factor that distinguished thermal mass performance from conventional stove heating. Households relying on frequent refiring faced repeated freeze-thaw cycles that often resulted in burst water containers and frozen supply lines. Jacob's steady interior temperature prevented his water storage from freezing, eliminating the need to melt snow while conserving fuel that neighbors burned for ice on melting rather than space heating. By the storm's third day, neighbors began visiting Jacob's cabin to verify the reports of consistent interior warmth. Mrs. Anderson, a Swedish immigrant whose family operated a carpentry business in the settlement, spent several hours examining Jacob's stone assembly and bench construction. She measured the surface temperature of the thermal mass using a metal probe, discovering that the stones remained warm to the touch 60 hours after Jacob's last significant firing. Her own cabin, heated by a conventional stove, required continuous feeding to maintain temperatures barely above freezing. The social validation that Jacob had sought for 2 years materialized during these neighbor visits. Morrison, the supply agent who had dismissed Jacob's underground oven concept as impractical European luxury, acknowledged that the thermal mass system had proven more reliable than any manufactured stove he sold. Thompson, who had been among the most vocal critics of Jacob's masonry project, asked detailed questions about construction techniques and material requirements for building similar systems. Documentation of the storm's impact appeared in territorial newspapers and government weather reports that recorded the unusual severity of the weather event. These official records noted that several homesteads had been abandoned when heating systems failed completely, while others reported livestock losses due to inadequate shelter heating. Jacob's household experienced no cold-related problems, maintained normal daily activities, and actually consumed less fuel during the crisis than during typical winter weather. The economic implications extended beyond immediate fuel savings to include reduced equipment replacement costs and improved property value. Conventional stoves damaged during the storm required expensive repairs or complete replacement, while Jacob's stone system required no maintenance and actually demonstrated improved performance characteristics. Real estate assessors began noting masonry heating systems as valuable property improvements that increased homestead resale values throughout the territorial land market. By spring, 3 additional families in the immediate area had begun excavation work for their own underground stone ovens, consulting with Jacob about foundation techniques and flue design principles. The thermal mass heating method had proven its practical value under the most demanding conditions possible, establishing it as a legitimate alternative to conventional frontier heating technology.